Welcome to, I don't know, the 37th, did it say on the thing? Solidarity session. So it's been a lot of them. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm joining from unceded Jara country and pay respect to elders past and present and any other First Peoples with us tonight. Looking forward to hearing what Ben has to share about advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing, and then applying it to a certain extent to the current national abattoir campaign and thinking through when should we be doing any of these things, when are the right approaches applied. But I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's the AFSA National Secretary and also a farmer down in the Otways, young farmer. And he's going to run the session based on some work that we did with the mob out of Berkeley on this very topic. So I also am finishing my dinner. Normally we eat much later, but we did it early with the grandbaby. So I'm going to finish eating. I'm going to turn my camera off while Ben talks. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Tam. And yeah, g'day everyone. I don't know you all, and there's a small group of us, so maybe, I don't know, we could go around and just say whose country we're joining from today. So yeah, as Tam said, I'm Ben. I'm joining from unceded Wadawurrung country. I'm gonna pass it over to Amy.
Hello, I'll turn my little noisy mini fan off. I'm on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and it's a really lovely day today.
Nice. And Dave?
G'day. I actually don't know what it is. That's something I'm going to have to find out. I probably do. Well, I don't know, actually. I'll find it. I'll get back to you.
That's great.
Can we crowdsource, Dave? Where are you in
in Newcastle, just south of Newcastle.
Is it? Oh, I want to say like a Wakable.
Yeah, I think it might be. I was going to say a Wabical. Yeah.
And Chanel?
Hi, I'm on Darawal country.
Great, thanks. Nice to meet you. And yeah, Christy, g'day. I know you.
Hello. Yep, I'm on Gardabunod country.
Beautiful. And Ivan, g'day. I also know you. We're just doing a round of intros, just saying whose country you're joining from.
Thanks, Ben. I'm on Wadawurrung.
Great, thank you. And Linda, nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm on Garigal land.
Great. Sweet. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for joining. So as Tam said, today we'll be talking about advocacy, mobilizing and organizing and social change stuff from a course that we did with UC Berkeley called Skills to Win. And that was organized by and sort of created by a labor organizer from the US. And so we'll just start the session. I prepared some slides, so we'll just like talk a little bit more about like the content sort of stuff at the start. And also, Tam, maybe if you could actually come join at the start and just provide a bit of like context about the campaign too. Maybe just like a show of hands, who here is like aware of the abattoir campaign that AFSA is doing? Yeah, everyone. Sweet. Okay. So yeah, I don't know if Tam, if you want to say something, maybe a little like update on what's going on, just to sort of, yeah, I guess bring us all in and yeah.
Sure. Yes, thanks, Ben. I think so. We know the loss of abattoirs across the country is accelerating, and the consolidation of ownership is accelerating. We also know the government was not particularly interested in doing anything about this, and they now have some interest because of the major disruption to farmers' lives and people's access to local meat. So they're getting interested, but I don't know if it's fast enough. We have petitions in Victoria and Tasmania. Victoria's finished, Tasmania's is still live. We have them drafted for New South Wales, Queensland, WA. Not for SA, because we're not actually seeking any particular reform there right now. They have more enabling legislation to build micro abattoirs than the other states. But we're searching for MPs to sponsor those petitions at the moment. You can't put them up until you have a sponsor. So that work is in progress. We've written to the ministers, in the ag ministers or their equivalent in every state. We've had responses from Tasmania and Victoria. We had an earlier response from WA, but it was kind of the market will sort this out response, so not a particularly helpful one. We've then also sent all of those letters to the other relevant portfolios that'll be interested in supporting the petition, we hope. That'll be up in every state, and to all the shadows with relevant portfolios. And then farmers in each state, as they can or as appropriate, are talking with the local.
Being recorded.
Whoa.
Okay, got it. Where was I? Sorry, I just lost that.
Was it, sorry, I missed it as well. Were you on petitions?
And letters to the ministers, and so farmers where they have a friendly local member are also trying to get meetings with local members. So we're just trying to, basically, we're trying to get conversations with the government officials, the politicians who are friendly to our cause, to get them into conversation. And so before they go in to consider a petition that goes into the parliament, there's heaps of them that already know about it, that already have a view about it, and then we might get more traction in that way. Then there's also, we've produced the Meat Collective starter pack. And that's basically, here at Jonai, we've shared all of our documentation to date. So there's the DA if you do have to apply for a planning permit, which is currently the case in every state. There's the food safety program. There's the draft OPEX and P&L. There's the in progress CapEx, like what it's costing us to build it. There's the building design, so the plans. There's a governance model and there's a fundraising sort of model. So all of that is available for AFSA members. And the response to that has been extraordinary. The number of farmers contacting us from across Australia saying, can we get the Meat Collective starter pack? Our community is organizing. This will really help us. And the idea of the starter pack was what's taken Jonai 7 years to get to the point where we're hoping to be licensed by April or May. We want everyone else to be able to do that in 3 to 12 months, depending on whether you need to do large animals or not. At Meredith, they literally had those up and running within 3 months of getting the container put in, because it's goats. There's no cattle. So the smaller ones can be set up very quickly. So yeah, so the organizing end of that is that the farmers are organizing themselves, and they're often with support from allies. The mobilizing bit is that we're doing quite a lot of social media on the topic, and that's helpful to spread information, but it's not going to build you an abattoir. And then the advocacy, of course, doing lots of that with government. Does that enough for you to go on?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Tam. And yeah, I guess just as I go through this presentation, if like anyone has any questions or like something I said doesn't make sense, just yell at me. It's meant to be like an open conversation, not a lecture. So yeah, chirp up if you'd like. So yeah, this is basically just like an overview of what I'll talk about for the next like 20 minutes or so. So first I'll run through this like distinction of the terms we're using: advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing, and then looking at how that relates to theory of change and like what a theory of change even is. And then this will tie into the role of structure in organizing and also identifying and testing organic leaders. And if these terms are sort of like foreign, that's fine. We're going to like step through them, and they were very foreign to me before a few months ago. So yeah, I guess first of all, this like distinction between these three terms that we're talking about. Advocacy is, your typical sort of mode of social change that's pursued by NGOs, and this is about paying lawyers, researchers, lobbyists to advocate on behalf of a constituency of people. And this inevitably involves like a small group talking about the problems that a larger social group is experiencing and trying to create change. Mobilizing is a little bit different because it involves like more people. It's getting people up off the couch or getting people to take action. But importantly, this is with people who already agree with you on something. Whereas organizing is a little bit different because it focuses on a structure. So whether that's like a workplace or like your local community, and it's about speaking to everyone within that structure. And those people might not necessarily already agree with you. So it's about just like talking to people, which is very different to mobilizing, because it's about, you know, talking to the people who already agree with you and also like amplifying their voice. So I guess this is just like another way to view it, just repeating what I was saying, is that, you know, advocacy involves a small number, mobilizing can be a larger number, but ultimately organizing is the largest because it's focusing on a whole structure. And when we're thinking about like how we involve people who are experiencing the things that we're trying to fix in society, advocacy treats them more like an object. You know, it's like a community external to me. Whereas the further you go to mobilizing and organizing, it's having people be sort of like the protagonists in creating change. And so ultimately, these like three models have different theories of change. But first of all, like what even is a theory of change? It's a hypothesis pretty much about how you get from A, which is the current context, to B, a future that you'd like to see. And all too often, like in our work, there's this sort of like magical thing that happens in the middle. And that's when we don't make our theory of change explicit, because, you know, we have sort of magical thinking in a way that our tactics will lead us towards the future we want, without actually detailing like what the specific steps are of how we get there. So it involves us asking the sort of questions like, what are our interests? What do we want? Who holds the resources needed to address these interests? And also, like, what are their interests and what do they want? And so, yeah, often our theories of change hold assumptions, and these are really important to make explicit. And generally, our theories of change can be categorized into two sort of main themes that exist. The first is an information deficit. So it's like we assume in our head that people in power don't know enough. And so if they were presented with the facts of something, they would see our point, see our logic, and then make change based on those. I guess it's like kind of quite like an idealistic view of the world. Whereas another is a power deficit, that the people who have authority or power over making a decision, they, one, don't care about how bad things are, or they're actively benefiting from it. So ultimately, what we have to do is find ways to make them say yes when they want to say no. And yeah, to make this a bit more explicit, you can tie in any issue. So if you take, say climate change as an example, I'd just be interested to have a show of hands. Say the Albanese government's expansion of like new fossil fuel projects. Could you raise your hand if you think Anthony Albanese doesn't know the potential impacts of those fossil fuel expansions? Do you think he's doing it because he's not aware of the problems? Okay, and who thinks it's instead a issue of power, that Mr. Albanese either doesn't care about how bad things are, or maybe he's on that sweet fossil fuel money? Who thinks it's that one? Nice. Okay, so then in thinking about like where most action in the climate space sort of occurs, who thinks that, raise your hand if you think that most of the efforts of the climate movement have been to address a information deficit. So it's like, if we think that if we think that by presenting the climate science to those in power, then they'll make changes. Who thinks that's been the sort of general move? Yeah, interesting. And who thinks it's the opposite, the power deficit? Cool. Yeah. So that, I mean, that's like, so that is like a perfect example. It's so interesting how we often act differently to how we intuitively know like the context of the problem and why it exists. So I think that's an interesting point to reflect on. And interesting as well that in thinking, you know, when I was doing a bit of thinking about like the abattoir campaign, I think so far it's focused a lot on this sort of like information deficit theory of change, that we're presenting the sort of facts to the government and making them aware about these issues. And I think the, you know, sort of latest meetings with ministers has really shown that they're now aware of the issue and they're not changing, and they haven't made a commitment. So thinking about how we can sort of switch into this like more power-based theory of change is, I think, an interesting point to reflect on.
The thing I would jump in on that, Ben, to say is like, well, I mean, I think AFSA generally has done more of similar to other activists filling the information deficit than the power one. But we've been proposing in Victoria, we've been proposing reforms to the government, not just because here's a problem. If you know about it, you'll do something about it. Obviously, we do that. But then we propose solutions that are about changing the planning scheme and changing particular things in the food safety laws. So we have been providing reforms that would shift the power balance by putting it back into communities' hands. And but where we've got stuck is your point about magical thinking. How do we get from, we're not only giving them, they know how bad the problem is, but we are giving them the solutions. But whereas the magical thinking is, how are we going to get them to do something about that when they're still benefiting from the existing system? So it's kind of a mix, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, even interesting, then it just made me think like, even sort of providing solutions, it's still sort of like an information deficit, because it's like, oh, if they were aware of what reforms would be best to suit our cause, then they will implement them. Do you know?
Because we've seen them do that previously. Like if you write their reforms for them, the ministers usually have no idea what the legislation is that's an issue here. You know, so when you give them an alternative, as long as it doesn't undermine their power, which is held by the people paying their salaries in many cases, if it doesn't undermine that, then they'll implement them. But in this case, the meat industry itself is a bit problematic.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, it's like also on these things, there's no like value, you know, like value judgment placed on either information deficit or a power deficit theory of change. They're all like hypotheses about how, you know, you think the world works and how things change. So yeah, if like providing information has worked, then, you know, that's great.
I think the work that I know you do around like that you've been reading a lot on power mapping, I think is super interesting to understand. So why would they not take easy reforms, if you like, and just implement them? What's going on? What do they stand to lose if they implement it? Anyway, keep going.
For sure. And yeah, so I guess like, I mean, I'm sometimes a sucker for a quote, I must admit. But yeah, it reminds me of this one, that in a democracy, there are only two types of power. There's organized people and organized money. And organized money only wins when people aren't organized. And so I guess to bring back to this point about, you know, advocacy, mobilizing, organizing, and I guess specifically making the distinction between the mobilizing and organizing, you know, things that are involved in mobilizing might be, you know, giving a call out on social media. It could be calling a meeting. But one of the challenges when we're mobilizing without a structure is that we don't really have like any sort of baseline to or metric to compare how well we're doing. If we just have like an endless constituency, it's difficult to see what percentage, like how we're improving. Whereas organizing is different in the sense that it has a structure, again, whether it's like a geographic community, a occupation, or a workplace, and it instead asks how many people live here, what percentage have joined, how many people attend a meeting, and how many participate in an action. So can you see the difference here about how if you have a bounded number, you can see how many people are participating within that set number? Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. Yeah, and again, organizing at work is similar questions. How many people work here? How many turn up to meetings? These sorts of questions. And so, yeah, just to harp that point again, mobilizing is about the people who already agree with you. Organizing can also include, and likely does include, those who are opposed. And this, I think, was a really interesting question that I was like unsure about, is how do you speak to these people who are on the left side of this spectrum here and might be in active opposition or passive opposition? I think this is like a really interesting question, and the tradition of organizing has an answer for it. And it's mainly centered around this idea of activists and leaders. And I'll get into why they're important. But first of all, I'll just define these terms. What's an activist and what's a leader? An activist is someone like me, rock up to the meetings, you're down for the cause, but you might not necessarily be the person who's most convincing within the community within the various communities that you're in. But an organic leader is very different because they're someone who's respected and trusted by their neighbors. They're someone whose views are sought after. They might have a history of, making things happen within the community. And often they don't agree with us and avoid groups because, they just get things done. But importantly, when they do have an opinion and want to act, they're weather vanes because others follow. And when I was reading this, I didn't know what a weather vane was. So I also put a picture up there if anyone else isn't sure. Maybe I'm exposing myself. But yeah, anyway. So then the question goes to, I guess, how do we identify who these organic leaders are? And so within our constituency, we can identify organic leaders by asking questions like, in a workplace, if you were faced with a new challenge at work, who would you ask for advice? And, this sort of makes sense, like intuitively, that if you think about the people in your community that you go to, they're people that you trust and trust their opinion. So finding that out from the people around you in your community is really important. And then we can also identify the organic leaders by taking a next step and doing something called a structure test. So that involves asking people to undertake a task that involves getting other people to do something. So this could be like, once you find or you think someone is an organic leader within a community because people seem to trust this person and go to this person, you could then go to that leader and ask them to take an action that is, could be really small. It could be asking them to have 15 people or however many people come to a meeting. And then what you can do is assess if that person is an organic leader within their community, and if they're able to lead people to take action. And so, yeah, I guess the structure tests again, which I just said, demonstrates if we can move the majority of people within a constituency into action. But it can also tell us where there's gaps. So if, you know, say we're wanting people to come to meetings scattered within a community. If we see in one segment there's not as many people coming to the meeting, we know that that area is somewhere where we need to focus, and maybe we haven't identified the right leaders, or we need to do more work building trust in that community. And it also builds confidence that we're all organized and can therefore increase our commitment, increase our appetite for risk and taking collective action together towards things that we decide on are important within that constituency. And so ultimately what organizing is about is about developing leadership. And this is about taking responsibility for enabling others to achieve purpose in the face of uncertainty. And I'll just wrap up with this quote that I love from Ella Baker, who was a civil rights organizer in the US. And so you didn't see me on television, you didn't see the news stories about me. The kind of role that I tried to play was to pick up pieces or put together pieces out of which I hoped organization might come. And Ella Baker's like central theory is that strong people don't need strong leaders. And I absolutely love that. So I guess we'll like open up the discussion. First of all, were there any questions that that came up at all that you'd like to ask? With the sort of we covered a lot of ground very quickly. But yeah, I'd be curious to open the floor if there are any questions, or if not, we can talk a bit more specifically about the abattoir campaign. Sweet. Okay, that's all good. Well, that means I was very clear and everything made so much sense to everyone, which is great. Yeah, so I guess like one thing that I was kind of hoping for today was to come out with more questions about where we need to explore with the abattoir campaign. It's kind of been a few months on since we started, so I think it's a good time to reflect and sort of refine where we're heading. And so I guess a question I had, which I mean, again, I don't have the answers, but you know, like we're collecting, we've collected survey data from farmers, and governments are really interested in looking at this survey data to kind of see like how big the problem is, or sort of like what scope they're sort of dealing with. And I guess it sort of again fits into this like information deficit theory of change. And I would just I'm really curious to see how the government respond when we provide them with that data, whether they do make a change, or whether they simply don't want to, or are benefiting from the status quo. And so I guess it's a theory, like a question in my head is, if the situation changes and they continue not to take action, for us, like what would a power-based theory of change look like? I think we're already doing it, like, you know, organizing people to build their own abattoirs, but how can we use those structures of communities that are building their abattoirs and mobilize them to ultimately act for the government to change their policies or implement reforms? And so I think that's a question that I had, and I'd be interested or curious to hear what other people think. I don't know what the experience in the room is like, but yeah, I'd be interested to to hear people's thoughts, or if you have a different thought. Yeah, Linda.
Hi.
Cool.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, that's better. Sorry. I'm not very good at this stuff. Look, I am finding as a city dweller with a hobby farm, we are thinking of being more involved in this, but from a previous background of industrial farming with not really knowing where the meat was going, but now very conscious, thanks to AFSA, of where our food comes from, including our meat. The biggest thing I'm finding when I talk about is the ignorance in the city of where people think their meat's coming from. It's and I'm sure you've heard this before. As farmers, you'll probably all know this, but I'm right in the middle of it. People are surprised. They're surprised that their meat is now. I explain it as best I can from Tammy's point of view, that small farmers are no longer able, potentially may not be able to send their meat that they have nurtured and fed and looked after, pigs, cattle, sheep, whatever, to a selected abattoir for a serviced kill, and that meat, I have to put it simply because people really don't want to know what happens to the meat between when it's in the paddock and when it appears on their plate. They don't, they're quite surprised when I say, well, the small farmers are could potentially no longer receive that meat that they have nurtured back to their communities, and also for the little bit that is going out to beyond. I find the ignorance incredibly overwhelming, and I'm not really sure how to deal with it. And it needs to be said simply, because I'm not working in it and I'm not there like you all are on the ground. I need, as a person who really believes and understands where you're coming from, I need something where I can start to move in community. People are aware of the health issues. I work in health, and I don't know whether I'm actually sort of trying to summarize this too quickly, but it is really complex. I don't know whether government is the answer, in my opinion. I think small community groups, particularly in the city, are the answer, particularly areas where they're interested and they're really keen to see a better health outcomes in the city. They don't want to, a lot of people here don't want to go to Woolworths and Coles and buy their meat. They'd rather go to the farmers markets. We have one farmers market where we live here. One. And it goes from 8 till 1 on a Friday. They're these, it's exactly what Tammy, when I met her, said, you know, it's these community, and I know they take time, but I'm desperate to do something for up here. I know you're talking government, but I'm not really sure what else to say really beyond that, if you get the picture. Does that make any sense, what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Dave, you had your hand up.
Yeah, g'day guys. Look, I'm a rank amateur as well. I'm in a little bit of a similar situation. I'm a city kid who's trying to, you know, do the right thing by my little block and my kind of bit of land that I'm responsible for at the moment. And this is something I've been following you guys for ages through, you know, just on social media and stuff, but just thought I'd dial into this. It's just interesting. I'm the same thing. I live in the city, but we have a little property down in Tassie. The power deficit, I think, thinking about politicians, to me, I don't think that they're necessarily sort of not interested because they've got the snouts in their trough of this particular game. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's big commercial, big multinational meat companies or whatever that donate to political parties of all stripes and all this kind of thing. But I actually think the politicians just don't care. This is not something that's on their radar. They're quite happy if everyone goes to Woolies and buys their groceries at Woolies, and that's just the way it works, because we know that Woolies donates to political parties. I don't think it's necessarily that they're benefiting directly or even indirectly. I think they've got bigger fish to fry. And that's my concern, is that if we try and work at it from, teaching them what all this means and how serious it is, they're not going to get it if they're not interested. And thinking that they're doing this because of like that classic power deficit type thing, I don't think is the key. I think this is a small fry thing. They're like, we've got these loopy guys out there who think they want to eat grass-fed beef and, organic veggies, and they're all woo-woo, and there's just not enough people to swing votes. I think this is honestly what it is. And I guess the point is, with the current state of the world, as weird as it is, you look at someone like RFK in the States, and I'm not trying to bring politics into it because I don't care, but at least they've got a guy there who's pushing, a health agenda, which is on a massive scale. And, whether you agree with his policies of, vaccinate, all this kind of stuff, doesn't matter, but they've got someone who's actually driving, because really when this comes down to it, it's a health issue. I mean, I work in health as well. I deal with the consequences of, poor diet and diabetes, and just every single day. And my favorite line is, I tell people, if your grandmother didn't recognize it as food, don't eat it. I just think that's the best advice. But the punters don't get it. So I'm just worried that we don't have a lever to pull to change their way of thinking, even though we know how important this is. And, I'm late to the game. I've had to learn this. I don't know. I read The Omnivore's Dilemma 7 years ago, and it changed my life. And you can probably see my bookshelf behind me. I've got, every regenerative farming. I'm the best book learned farmer in the world, but I've got no idea what I'm doing. But this is, I think, the problem is that the people who have the power to make a difference just really don't care enough. And I would actually be really happy if they said, you know what, we care so little, you guys just go off and do whatever you want. Like, that would actually be easier. Do you know what I mean? Rather than banging heads with us. So I've got to be kind of guided by you guys to where we go from here. You're the experts in this field, but just my thoughts on it, that I think that's a much bigger hurdle to try and jump than just teach people and work out what their power interest is in the issue. So that's my thoughts on it anyway.
Yeah, I think you raised some really good points, and I think I guess it's like a question of, is there any way that we can get them to care? Is there any way that we can create enough of a crisis for them that it disrupts them and they actually have to act? But I think also, like, linking back to the point you were making, Linda, I guess there's like lots of different sort of forms of power, and the government one is, like power over, like governments have authority to or have the power to, make the change that we want to see. But the other one is like power with, and that's when we have the resources with our communities to be able to implement this change. And I think it's an important one to think about, is the resources that we actually have with us to be able to start doing these things right now and be building micro abattoirs. But I think from our perspective, You know, we've estimated that it costs, or from Tam's budgeting of their abattoir, it was about 200 grand to build theirs. And that's bloody hard to mobilize in a, you know, in a small community, 200 grand. And so we've put forward that communities raise 100 grand, and then that's grant matched by the government. So I don't know, maybe if you can raise some money in the city and send it out to the communities, that would, I mean, I'm all ears for that strategy.
Can I respond as well to the question though, like about faith in government, or whether we should be putting our energies there in terms of the organizing, the mobilizing, or the advocacy? Because that's the question AFSA asks of movement building all the time. And that's why, you know, in our values and theory of change, we talk about being reformists and radicals, because we do think you have to be reforming the existing system while you radically undermine it to build the new one. So that's the kind of mirrored work, I guess, we're always doing. And the question about, I mean, it's such an important point, Dave. Like, I don't think they care. Actually, Linda made the same point. I don't think they care enough, and we're small beans for them. And that's why that survey data is actually helpful, because what makes them care is thinking knowing that there are greater numbers affected, so more constituents are affected. And that's why we also point out it's not just the small scale farmers, it's also the butchers, it's also the people who want to eat the meat. So actually the population is much bigger than just the farmers themselves. But the other thing that, to your point, Ben, like what will shift the power dynamic, it's when you flog them in the media. You know, we've tried not to do that because we've been working with the Victorian government pretty productively for some time. And so we didn't want to use the stick while the carrot was working. But now that we're at a push point and they're not showing any real energy for doing something more quickly, when we have people about to lose their whole livelihood, we're going down the stick line. And so that, you know, talking to media about government being asleep at the wheel again. And they hate that. At this point, we've gone softly in, not naming any particular. It's a national campaign. We haven't talked about Victoria being asleep at the wheel, or WA being asleep at the wheel, or naming those ministers. Like, that's the next level of putting that pressure on them. But at first you try to do it kind of more broadly, and then make them be the ones like, well, I hear in WA they're still being really slow, but in Victoria we're starting to talk to them. You know, you're just playing this this power balance all the time. I still have genuine uncertainties about whether all of the work we do with government is predominantly a waste of time, and whether we should in fact do what we've talked about for the last year or more, a National Harvest Day, and everybody kills an animal on farm and puts it all over social media. And what are they going to do? Come and like arrest us all or fine us all? That's not going to happen. So at what point do you just go for strategic, mass, collective non-compliance? And I think we're like this close to that.
Yeah, and I guess like that, you know,
And then you get back to organizing. How do you get everyone to do it?
exactly, that's the strategy. And yeah, I guess like those sort of actions, like that's creating a crisis for people, and they have to act. Amy, that's a great question, and absolutely not. I think the main difference that they talk about with especially like mobilizing versus organizing is that organizing should be sort of like the dominant strategy, but then when you have that group organized, of course, like mobilizing is an important tactic. And so, you know, like what Tam was saying about the National Harvest Day, that would be mobilizing your organized group to take action.
Yeah. And having just done the roadshow up the East Coast, we have a lot of communities really kind of tapped in and ready. They're organized and they're ready, I think, for the mobilization. I've had several farmers ask, are we going to do the National Harvest Day? And I think we've got another couple of weeks, honestly, of finding out whether people are going to have solutions to keep farming in the loss of abattoirs, in the face of the loss of abattoirs, to decide whether we're calling a National Harvest Day. and then figuring out how we're organizing that. Like literally, what technologies do we use so everyone knows when, without some people being put at risk and getting in trouble?
Sorry, Dave, though, I feel like I cut you off. I feel like you had a response before to Tam.
Oh no, sorry, no, not really. I was just something you said, Ben, about if the city could raise money. I mean, money's great. Like I think it's we're going to build micro abattoirs. They have to be paid for somehow, and I think I've been watching what you guys have been doing. It's quite incredible and uplifting. But it's unfortunately it's not just money. I mean, I think the thing is if we it's more, I mean, really, when it comes down to it, it's the regulations and the permissions. That's what we're fighting for. If they just left us alone, it would probably just happen organically, like it used to happen. Like people just used to, there was a local abattoir close by, and local farmers used it, and some sold their meat and some kept their meat. Like it's so. I don't know that. I mean, money is always an issue, absolutely, but I don't think it's the main issue. I think it's the regulation and the bureaucracy. I guess it's the real hurdle. Because if they said, okay, open slather, the regulations are in place, you're all safe, you're all certified, as long as you use this design and it's Temple Grandin techniques, whatever it is, whatever they say is the standard. You have to have, what does Joel Sullivan talk about? You have to have a toilet for the USDA inspector or something, like whatever it is. Like if they said this is the rules, you can do it, it'll get done. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just that we need them to say either this is how you have to do it, or just do whatever you want and get on with it. That's the hurdle, really.
Yeah.
Then we can deal with the money after that.
I actually think, I agree with you. And actually $200,000, if you've got 20 farms involved in the build, is actually not a lot of money between them and their communities. It is for one farm, but not for 20. And so those regulatory barriers are probably why in this next phase of the campaign, which is only 6 weeks old, Ben, it's not several months. It started,
I thought it
started on like the December, like 15th of December, when Hardwicks gave us the email telling us we were all kicked out.
God, feels like an eternity.
Yeah, it does. But 19th of December, it was my delivery day, I remember, because I also had a horrendous flu and had to come home and start an abattoir campaign instead of going to bed. But I think probably the next stage of the campaign, because the planning reforms that we're seeking so that micro abattoirs would be easier to build, they're going to take longer. They're a couple of years in the pipeline. I don't care how interested the government is. Planning reforms are painful. The application of the game meat standards is the one that actually has the capacity to very quickly enable on-farm kills. And then there's another bottleneck around meat inspectors. There aren't enough of us, but that's another thing to deal with. And they dealt with it on Lord Howe Island. They didn't have to go do all their time in the abattoirs on the mainland because they couldn't go away for 6 weeks and do their hours. So they were given an exemption that they could only, they didn't do those hours, but they could only inspect on Lord Howe Island. So if the exemption is you can only inspect in your abattoir, cool, great, we're into it. It's the only place we're looking to inspect. So I think the next stage, maybe thinking about what we're talking about here, is we need to go hell for leather on the game meat standards, because that's the one we can win most quickly if we can get the political will. And then we have to go back to Ben's point about power and figure out how do we shift the power so that the politicians do actually go, okay, I could be discredited if I don't support this, as opposed to I'll be discredited if I do support this. So we have to find a way for them to find that the most legitimate means. And the thing is, it's a nonsense to suggest that you can kill game safely under that standard, but not domestic livestock. It's an absolute nonsense. But governments are full of nonsense. They're like, inconsistencies are rife. So we can't use that argument. It's not, they do it all the time.
And I think, yeah, Tam, you raised a good point before about going to the media and with public image, and I guess thinking about pushing those reforms, like ultimately one of the main resources that politicians need from us is their public image and their public perception. So I guess, that is a form of power that we have to be able to potentially disrupt their public image. And I guess in thinking of that, like going to the media is one tactic to do that. And I wonder if anyone has any ideas about how AFSA could be involved in undertaking other tactics that could potentially like disrupt public perception.
One thought I have, Ben, and others should speak, I should stop, but we need to commission research showing that the food safety standards for game meat would be totally safe to apply to domestic livestock. So we did that around the biosecurity stuff they brought up with the Victorian planning reforms we got in 2018, because you had most of the research around biosecurity, well, almost all of it comes out of industrial ag, like that's what's doing it. And so we commissioned somebody to write us a report about the spurious concerns about higher biosecurity risks from pastured poultry in particular was their claim. And so if we did the same, if we found somebody, a microbiologist who could do the work for us about why the game meat standard is safe for game and therefore also for domestic livestock, arguably from the people I've spoken with, it's safer for domestic livestock because the disease burden on game is actually higher than domestic production when they're not in sheds, when they're outdoors. So yeah, I think that's the other tack. It's not just media, it's evidence.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, Linda, just in answer to that, well, actually, Dave probably knows you're in the Hunter Valley. But when I came through there and went to Dungog, their access has been getting worse and worse for many years. And there's a group there who are self-organizing. They're building a micro abattoir on one of the farms. And I met with them. We had a peasants at the pub session. It's under, I think they've got their DA in and it's kind of underway. And yes, we've been in the Saturday paper. Not the Monthly or Schwartz, but yes, there are definitely possibilities.
Yeah, and I guess that feeds into like that's like a tactic of going to the media. And yeah, I wonder if anyone has any thoughts about alternative tactics.
Is there anyone I don't know, famous, like who has pull in the public sphere, not necessarily on this topic, but who is a believer in this? Is it Hugh, the actor in who's from New Zealand? What's his name? Oh, crikey. Anyway, he posts stuff on Instagram and about his farm, and he's got a winery. I can't remember his name. But is there someone in Australia do we know anyone who's, I don't know, who's a name in the media that grabs attention, that just needs to, who actually believes in this, and who I don't know, Brian Brown, or I don't know who you find, but it just might be someone, like if my melon ends up on TV, people are going to go, who's this joker? Like, it's just not a thing. Like, I think we need someone who grabs attention for whatever reason.
Yeah, who's already famous and who's actually like-minded.
And then says, this is something we really need to talk about. So maybe we need to put some thought into that. But
yeah, no, it's true. We've used that in campaigns in the past a bit. So, and like Costa, for example, has helped us heaps with various book campaigns. And so, yeah, thinking about who that is and who's not so problematic in their own right that you want them as your champion.
And I think
it's a good idea, though.
Yeah, I think tying it back to what we've been talking about today, Like, I think that is a great sort of like in terms of like again, there's no value judgments placed on all these things. I think as Amy was saying before, like a combination of all of these things is really important. And I think that fits like really well into like that's like an advocacy way of doing things, because it's, you know, a person acting on others' behalfs. And yeah, so I wonder, because again, the media strategy also sort of fits into that more advocacy model. And I wonder if there's any thoughts about what like a organizing approach or even a mobilizing approach could look like to be disrupting public image.
Organising the abattoir workers and the big industrial abattoirs. You've been looking at the Meat Workers Union, Ben?
Yeah. to do what? To do what?
To get their stories out about what those places are like, and to get the politicians to stop taking them as given of how this food system works. And also to obviously advocate for them to have better rights in those places. Because they're not.
What's their union? Oh, sorry. What's their union like then? If you've
Well,
been speaking with them, are they?
I've emailed.
Because we
no response.
Yeah, no contact. Because we actually spoke to a group. I'll have to find the details, but they were doing a lot of mobilizing and organizing for migrant workers, particularly undocumented migrant workers that were working in a lot of those processing facilities.
Mhm.
I'll try and find contact details. They're doing some really cool work. I know that's a little bit different, and they bartered a lot of deals with the large processors to make sure people had stable conditions, stable housing, etc., weren't essentially slaves. It's a little bit different from people that are working for the corporations in a bit more of a structured way, but there could be collaboration there. I'll have to try and find the details.
Yeah, there could be. Yeah. Because I think while politicians refuse to do anything about the status quo, which is, you know, this endless focus on export, which means the logical outcome is coming true. We can't eat food here anymore because they're exporting it all, processing it and exporting it. The Hardwicks story here in Victoria, that's very much the case. Soon they won't be actually processing, they won't be selling anything into Victoria. Already the butchers in our region are having to get their meat out of Swan Hill, which is 4 hours away. And the biggest abattoir, you know, is right there in Kyneton, 40 minutes from here. So they are listening to that because they're seeing that it's having a broader food security impact. And it happened for us in Victoria. It happened at the same time as the inquiry into securing Victoria's food supply came out. The report came out. So at exactly the same time, which had, remember, it was like a week before Hardwick's announcement. It had the recommendation 29, which was our reforms we'd been submitting for 7 years. And it was recommendation 29 to enable micro abattoirs. And a week later, Hardwick said, all right, you got your report, you're out of here. I mean, who knows if it was connected? Probably not. But gee, it was interesting timing.
Well, I'm just looking at the time.
7:30.
Yeah, 7:30 already. Yeah, I guess, does anyone have any like final thoughts on that conversation, or just like any reflections I'd like to bring up before we bring it to a close?
Linda, I'll have a word with Rachel Ward. She actually reached out to me recently on various issues, and I might just see if she would like to put her voice into the ring on this. That would help. There are a lot of people listening to her and watching her, especially since the film came out. So,
Great. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. It was a good chat. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings, and become an AFSA member if you're not already. And yeah, keep up to date with what we're doing on the campaigns, and get involved. Yeah, we need your help. So.
And thanks. That's been really good, really helpful.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And to those I had met, lovely to meet you.
Thanks, guys. Bye. See ya.